Hello and welcome to another episode of the Intrepid Investor Podcast with your host, Vanessa the Investor. I am a buyer's agent, an engineer, and an investor myself, and I am here to help you out on your investment journey, be it property, wealth, health, or just general well-being. So in today's episodes, I'm going to focus on the property side of things. And one of the questions that I'm really getting a lot lately is, do I buy a new property or do I buy an old property? And I've kind of touched on this a little bit in my past episodes, especially now with the budget changes, because it almost seems like the government is trying to steer us towards putting more demand into brand new properties with the potential changes to negative gearing. And so they're wanting people to want to buy those types of properties as investments as well as home buyers. Now, I obviously don't think that's a good idea, not just as an investor, but in general for the economy, because you're putting more pressure into this market where it's meant to be for home buyers, and you're actually putting more pressure on investors to increase rents of their old property and, get the negative gearing, because they won't get negative gearing. So it's a way for them to actually offset their taxes in their own way. So when I'm talking about brand new property, I am talking about a property that is in an undeveloped area. So basically it was a forest literally a couple of years ago, and they've just taken down all the trees, flattened it out, put in the utilities, trying to figure out where to put a bus stop, trying to figure out where to put a shopping center. So it's these newly developed areas that also have plenty of land around them ready for the next lot to be built for them. So that's brand new property that I'm talking about. And then when I talk about established property, I'm talking about an old brick 80s, 90s, thousands property, something that's on a bigger land, something that has a bit more potential to it, something that you can add value to through a renovation or adding a granny unit or subdividing or something like that, because older properties have bigger land. These newer properties are basically just cookie cutter, and they're being made to just supply housing for people. So they're not made for investors. They're made to solve the problem of the housing market. They're made to get home buyers into there, to live there, to feel like they're living the Australian dream and tick the box. Now, I am going to give you a bit of a case study on each property type, because I have experienced it myself with my own properties, and I've also seen the difference between buying a brand new property versus an old property with my clients as well. So I've had clients that have come to me and been like, I want to buy a new property. I'll be like, why? And usually it's first-time buyers that want to reap the benefits of the first homeowners grants and all those kinds of things, which I understand. But even with those grants, so I had a client that came to me, she was eligible for the $30,000 first homeowner grant that we have in Queensland. She was eligible for the 5% deposit. She was eligible for no LMI. So she had these amazing things, and I don't think she had to pay stamp duty either with a brand new property. So she was going to save herself thousands. Like we're talking 30, 50, maybe $60,000. But she was going to have to buy a brand new property, and she had to live in it. So she had to find something that was close to her work and that was going to service her, because she only had a budget of about $550K. At the time, this was mid-year last year, she was looking at single bedroom apartments in Mount Gravatt. Now, this area is great. It's close to the city. It's got great amenities around it. It wasn't a brand new build that I'm talking about today, but nonetheless, it wasn't off the plan. So she could still get all those benefits. And the property for a 1-bedroom in a 40-lot apartment complex was going to be $600,000. That property has grown because of the area that it's in. However, it is a 1-bedroom apartment. Instead, she has bought a 2-bedroom townhouse unit. Instead, she has bought a 2-bedroom unit in the same area that she can now renovate to add value to, and it has actually gone up $180,000 in 6 months. So her brand new property would not have done that. This is because it is established. But like I said, that's one example of one client. And she is forever grateful that we went for the established property, especially since she's actually using that as her own place of residence and can move into it now. But it's in high demand for rent. It has got, I think it was about the yield was about 4.5%, which is amazing. So usually for property, you're looking at minimum 3.5%. Average is 3.5%. So that's your rental yield for the whole year, your rental income, for the whole year, divided by the price of the property that you buy. So it's actually a really good return. But because she wanted to live in it for a bit, she didn't experience that whole benefit. She did still get some of the benefits of being a first-time buyer, but not for new property. So she actually forgoed I think it was just the $30,000 grant that she couldn't get because that was purely for new properties. So she gave up $30,000 because she understood that the old property is going to be better for her than a 1-bedroom apartment on a busy road overlooking nothing in a 40-build complex. You have to really look at all of these little aspects because it's not just about the type of property and the benefits that you get up front. It's about what's the longevity of it. What is your goal? And that's what it really comes down to at the end of the day. What is your goal? Is your goal that you want to spend less up front? Is your goal that you want to get taxes back because you're taxed so high and you actually don't care about growth because you get that much money, you're that rich? If it is, brand new property, like the traditional example that I mentioned at the start, off the plan, out in the middle of nowhere. Okay, you just want to offset your taxes because you don't actually care for growth because you get enough money that you don't need an investment for whatever reason. I reckon if you're rich, you still invest, but some people don't agree with that. But for the average person who invests in property for growth, to have a second income, to be able to sell it, to cash in for their retirement, to support their children on. There's all these different opportunities with property that is around growth, not around what you pay up front, not around what taxes you get back. It's about the growth of the property. And growth of the property is based on supply demand, but mostly that supply demand comes from location. And location is an established location. Established locations provide higher demand because you've got the area of where the best schools are, where the nice daycares are, where the families are that have lived there for ages, where your friends live. You've also got the shopping centres and your transport system and your utilities and your roads and the council and everything's all set up and you've got your parks and it's just a homely area because it's been established and people have used it and are using it. And you know the types of people that live there because the demographic has been built over the years based on a number of other things. So you know, okay, this is going to be that kind of area, that kind of demographic there. Do I like that? Yes or no? With a new property, you don't know. You don't know what type of people are going to live there. You don't know if people are going to want to live there. You don't know what type of shopping center is going to be. You don't know what the bus or train situation is going to be like. So how can you expect someone to want to live there when you don't even know what it's about? And sure, maybe you've got the plans. Maybe you can see because obviously town planning goes into this development areas. So they do plan some of these things out. But by the time it becomes an area for someone to really want to live in, because let's be honest, all those new developments are in whoop whoop, like far away. By the time you figure that out, if they want to live there, it might be too late. You've already spent your money on your investment and it's not growing as well as you thought. So now I'm going to give you some examples, okay? On average, according to Claude AI, your property, if it's brand new versus an old established property, as we mentioned in the definitions at the start, is going to grow 3% less per year on average than an old property. Now you might think, 3%, that's nothing, but it compounds, yeah? Your growth compounds, which means every year, if it goes up by, say, 3% instead of 6%, you're already behind on the first year. If you buy the same property price, say you buy a property for $850, this one grows by 3%, this one grows by 6%. Now it grows on 6% of this price, this new high price. So you've got another 6% that next year. The newer property only grows 3%, but again, on that lower 3% price. So already in the second year, you've got a huge disparity. So let's look at the numbers. So we have this $850,000 we've put in. One's a brand new property, one's an old property. In year one, the old property goes up by 7% per annum per year, and the new property goes up by 4% per year. After year one, the difference between the growth is $25,000. So the old property has made $25,000 more than the new property. That's after year one. So the old property now is worth $909,000 and the new property is worth $909,000 and the old property is worth $884,000. So it's gone from $850 to $840. That's it. $880, sorry. Now year two, the difference goes bigger because we're compounding. So the new property is making $53,000 less than the old property. At year three, we now have a disparity, a difference of $85,000. The older property is making $85,000 more in growth than the new property. In year four, we're making $119,000 difference. The old property is making $119,000 more than the new property. If that doesn't paint the picture for you, then I'm going to go even further. Let's add negative gearing into that. So let's assume our investor is in the second highest tax bracket, so they are getting taxed 37% annually. So they're in the tax bracket of $135K to $190K income annually. And their annual rent is approximately $577 per week. Usually with those newer properties, if it's a 3-bedroom house on like a 400 square meter block, you're probably going to be getting about 600 max. So again, totally depends on area and whatever, but for this example, just stay with me. Your annual tax savings are going to be $5,000. That's it. From negative gearing. That's what you're saving. $5,000 a year. Okay? Amazing. Well done. You have gotten $5,000 back from the government. How does that compare to what you had before without the negative gearing? And then how does that new property compare to an old property that doesn't have negative gearing at all? Well, as you know, in year one, the old property was worth $909,000. The new property without negative gearing was worth $884,000. The new property with negative gearing is worth $889,000. In the first year, you have still a gap of $20,000 between an old property and a new property that has negative gearing. If your goal is growth, this is not good. You've lost $20,000. You've lost $20,000 that was yours, that you could take out in equity, that you could put towards another deposit for another property. That's $20,000 and that's just in the first year. Skip to year four. Again, you still negative gearing. Amazing. I got my new property. I can negative gear. The gap between an old property and a new property that you can negative gear is $99,000. You have lost $99,000 because you decided to go with a new property, because you could negatively gear it. Sure, you're only making, like, compared to the new build, you're only making an extra $5,000. It's $5,000 per year. The negative gearing doesn't compound. Your growth compounds. So every year, it's just $5,000. You get, amazing, an extra $5,000. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with getting $5,000, but if your goal is for your property to grow, if your goal is for your rental income to grow, if your goal is to have passive income, support your family in the future, potentially sell the property so that you can then pay off another mortgage or go on a holiday or support your retirement earlier, that $5,000 a year is going to do peanuts for you. Nothing. You've missed out on $100,000 in the first 4 years. Imagine holding that property for 10. Imagine how much more you would lose if you were to buy a new property purely because of the negative gearing versus an old property. Now, these numbers are estimates. They are not the exact of what's going to happen. I'm sure your accountant will have better methods to understand this more. And I highly recommend you speak to your accountant about this and get them to show the numbers for your particular situation, because everyone's income is different. Everyone's outcome is different. Every property that you look at is going to be different as well. But this is just on average. You can see it's not worth it. So when it comes to the federal budget, it's going to make me want to go into buying a new property. No, it doesn't help you. What's $5,000 a year? And if $5,000 a year means a lot to you, then maybe investing isn't that good for you. Because if you can't see past that, if you can't see the real gains, the real future, the real results that will actually move the needle for you in 10 years, that will actually help you get out of your 9 to 5 quicker, then property might not be for you. Maybe invest in shares. I don't know. Now I'm going to give you another example, another real life example from a client of mine. And myself, actually. So my first ever property, I think I've spoken about this before. If you haven't listened to my first property, please look through my playlist here on Spotify and check out the episode where I talk about it. It's how I got scammed, because I was talking to a property strategist who told me that in 10 years, I'll have like 8 properties and they'll be worth over $1 million because I'm going to have $1 million in my pocket because I'm going to buy 10 and then sell them all. I don't know, some shit like that. Honestly, he was getting paid by everyone else but me. So he was not doing it for my best interests. Anyway, he told me to buy a piece of land, 444 square meters in the middle of Logan Reserve. For those of you who don't know, Logan Reserve was in the middle of nowhere. It's a bit more centralized now, and there is a bit more demand for it now because that whole middle section between Brisbane and Gold Coast has really expanded. It is a place that people can actually afford to live in a house and be in a decent-ish area without having to pay over $1 million. Now, this was back in 2021. The land was $300,000 and the build was going to be approximately $500,000, $550,000. So we're saying that $500,000. So we're saying the property's total value was $800,000. Firstly, he told me it was going to be $600,000. But anyway, we move on from there. The rental income was only going to be $600,000, so I wasn't even 3% rental yield. So like I said before, 3.5 is usually what you want to look at. The rental yield was below that. And I could have bought an older property, literally more central, so more towards the freeway, bigger land, 700,000 instead of 444, and a bigger house with more opportunity to add value for a higher rental income for $700,000. Anyway, this property back then was worth $800,000. That's what I paid for the land and the build. It wasn't worth that much, actually. No, market value would have been way below that. It would have been about $650,000 because the older properties that were more inland were $700,000. So $650,000, right? But we're going to say $800,000 just for the purposes of this exercise. Let's say it was worth $800,000 in 2021. That's how much I bought it for. I would not have sold it for less. At the end of the day, I didn't actually proceed with the build because I figured out the numbers and it wasn't actually a good investment, but pretend I did, all right? Or whoever actually bought the land off me built on it, so the same issue for them. $800,000 2021. Today, that property is worth around $950,000. 3-bedroom house, 444 square meter block, partly on a noise overlay, right next to a main busy road, at the end of a development, right next to the next lot that's going to be built, which has started being built. So supply is going up. When supply goes up, the prices don't change too much. So you're looking at $950,000, but it's valued at today. So you've made $150,000 in 5 years, okay? $150,000 in 5 years, how does that sound? Oh, yeah, not bad. Well, it's pretty crap to me because that means you have grown per year 3.5%. Your property has grown 3.5% per year. That is below the average. That is below the 6% Australian average. 2.5, that is half the Australian average property growth rate. And you think that's a good investment because you can still negative gear it? I don't think so. Now we look at my client's property. My client bought this property in Southport, 1.165 million. It was a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom on a 680 square meter block. And you can add a little granny unit downstairs. You can add a second bathroom, which we did. We renovated it. And now with the renovation, that was worth $100,000. He paid $100,000 for the renovation. He paid $1.165 million for the property. And after 6 months, it's worth $1.4 million. So that's a growth of $150,000 in 6 months. I minused the construction costs from that. So it's he's made $150,000 profit in 6 months. The growth rate of that property is 20% in 6 months versus 3% in 1 year. The reason I showed you this example of the renovation is because this is what older properties can give you. So I gave you the other example of an established property before where it grew in 1 year, it grew $50,000 just by doing nothing. Now renovate that property and you have added 20% of the value in 6 months. And that includes the cost of the renovation. These old properties are not to be overlooked. There is so much value there. And down the track, we are going to establish the bottom, the base of, it's a Queenslander, which means it's got this area underneath it where you can make it into another dwelling. Sometimes it doesn't get the right heights and whatever, so it can't be rented out as an extra space, but it's definitely more appealing to those families that live with multiple generations in them. You put the parents underneath, maybe the teenage child goes under there, whatever it is. It is more appealing, it adds more demand, it adds more rental income, it adds more value, more growth. So there's more opportunities in this property. We didn't renovate the kitchen, we didn't renovate the old bathroom. So there's all these opportunities to add even more value. And I just recently settled on another property with a client of mine in Woodford, which is close to Logan. $830 for a 3-bed, 1-bath on a 700 square meter property, which is worth more. It's actually worth $890 at the same time because we bought it below market because it's old and needs work. Amazing. We are going to work on it. We are going to add a bathroom. We are going to add a granny unit. And then we are going to get an extra $150 a week of rental income. With the granny unit, an extra $350 a week. So that's an extra $500 a week just because of the renovations that we do on it. And then the value is going to be over $900,000 in less than 6 months. Those are the types of results you get with old property. New property, you cannot do anything to them because they're already new. They're on small lots. There is no room in the backyard. There is nothing else around them except for open lots for more properties to be built. And so this is why you're stagnant. This is why the growth doesn't go to the 6% average of Australia. It stays at 3%. Now, I feel like I made my point. But if I didn't, please feel free to reach out to me and ask me the question, show me a property that's actually worked better than an old property, because I guarantee you cannot find a new property that is in the middle of nowhere being built in this new development that is going to be better than an older property in an established place. You've heard it all before and it's not a lie. The best property you can buy is the worst property on the best street. The location controls the market, but by buying an old property, you can actually override the market by adding more value to it. So the only time a new build really makes sense is when you are in a really, really high tax bracket, the highest tax bracket, over 190 a year, and you don't care for growth. If you care for growth, you need to look at old properties. As always, share this episode with your friends or family who are looking at purchasing an investment property, and maybe they're tossing up between, do I buy an old property or a new property? And I hope that this can give them some more clarity, because I've gone through the numbers. The numbers don't lie. It is black and white. The old properties work much better than the new properties. And this is just something that we need to put in our heads, that sometimes these Australian government reforms, what's in the media, is just something to scare you or to make you do something that the government wants you to do, instead of doing something that's actually going to make you win, that's actually going to make your investment work as hard as it possibly can, that's going to get you that money, that growth, that lifestyle that you dream of, rather than just going with what the scare tactics show you. As always, keep being intrepid investors. I'll catch you next week.